Hello everyone, this is Mr. Laubach. Thanks for joining me. In this video, we are going to discuss two groups that played a major role in lighting the fuse of the American Revolution: the Sons of Liberty and their female counterpart, the Daughters of Liberty. So let's jump right in. In the mid-1760s, the American colonies were simmering with frustration over British taxes and policies. A group of colonists decided it was time to do something about it. This group became known as the Sons of Liberty. So what was their mission? They wanted to resist British control, particularly in the form of taxes, like the Stamp Act of 1765. Now, the Stamp Act was a tax imposed on all printed materials, from newspapers, books, pamphlets, legal documents, and even playing cards. It was a pretty big deal. It directly affected pretty much all of the colonists, and for the Sons of Liberty, it was the final straw. The Sons of Liberty organized quickly, and while their exact structure was pretty loose, their impact was immense. They took to the streets, protesting, boycotting British goods, and even intimidating tax collectors. In some cases, they went as far as tarring and feathering British officials. Their goal was simple: stop the British tyranny in its tracks, and they'd use any means necessary to get there. Now let's talk about a couple of the key figures of the movement. At the forefront was Sam Adams, one of the most prominent leaders in Boston. Adams was a master of organizing protests and mobilizing the public. He had a way of turning grievances into action, and his leadership was critical in pushing the resistance forward. Then there's John Hancock, who, aside from being known for his bold signature on the Declaration of Independence, was a wealthy merchant who helped fund many of the Sons of Liberty's activities. He also had his own personal reason for resisting British policies. As a smuggler, British taxes were bad for business. Paul Revere is another name most of us recognize. Famous for his midnight ride to warn that the British were coming, Revere was also an engraver. He used his artistic skills to produce anti-British propaganda that helped fuel public outrage. They basically served as political cartoons. And don't forget Patrick Henry, whose fiery speeches, like the famous "Give me liberty or give me death," inspired colonists to take action. James Otis and Joseph Warren also played key roles. From Otis's legal arguments against British policies to Warren's efforts in organizing local militias. But it wasn't just about speeches and protests. The Sons of Liberty took real direct action. One of the most famous moments was the Boston Tea Party in 1773. It was a protest against the Tea Act, and members of the Sons of Liberty, disguised as Native Americans, dumped an entire shipment of British tea into the Boston harbor. It was a bold, highly symbolic act of defiance, and it sent a clear message to Britain. The colonies wouldn't stand for taxation without representation, a rallying cry for the independence movement. Beyond the dramatic acts, the Sons of Liberty also helped create a system of communication between the colonies, known as the Committees of Correspondence. These committees were essential in spreading news and organizing resistance efforts across the colonies. It should be noted that the epicenter of the Sons of Liberty activity was centered in Boston, but their sentiment spread throughout the colony. Now, what was the result of all this? The Sons of Liberty were incredibly effective in galvanizing opposition to British rule. Their efforts didn't just stop the Stamp Act, but they laid the foundation for the American Revolution. They turned public sentiment, coordinated colonial resistance, and helped shape the ideals of liberty and self-governance that would eventually become the bedrock of the United States. But there was also the Daughters of Liberty. While they may not have been as famous as their male counterparts, their contributions were just as important. The Daughters of Liberty were a group of women who supported the cause of independence, largely through economic means. They organized what would become known as spinning bees to produce homespun cloth, which reduced the colony's reliance on British textiles. Think clothing. These women were key players in the boycott of British goods, especially tea. Their work helped fuel the non-importation movement, think boycotts, which was all about rejecting British goods and making the colonies more self-sufficient, which of course went against the principle of mercantilism. By doing this, they were hitting Britain where it hurt, their economy. The Daughters of Liberty may not have been on the front lines of protest, but their efforts in the home were crucial in sustaining the broader resistance movement. Without them, the boycotts wouldn't have been nearly as successful. It is important to note that the Sons of Liberty and the Daughters of Liberty were formed after the French and Indian War, when the period of salutary neglect was ended by the British because they needed to pay for the war efforts and wanted to tighten up their grip on the colonies. Also keep in mind that these two organizations were seen as terrorist groups by the British government. So to wrap things up, the Sons and Daughters of Liberty were instrumental in the early days of colonial resistance. The Sons took to the streets while the Daughters took to their homes. But both groups were vital in rallying the colonies against British rule. So thanks for watching, and I hope you're able to learn more about the Sons and the Daughters of Liberty. Have a great rest of the day.